Good day all, Dr. Palmer here. Today we'll be addressing the identity and cultural awareness of intersex people or people that are born with intersex conditions. We will examine a biography or autobiography written by Thea Hellman entitled Intersex for Lack of a Better Word. We will also be examining intersex advocacy, as well as looking at some other cultural relevant information. As always, I've provided you with a list of vocabulary words that will show up in this lecture. Some of those words you will be familiar with, such as dehumanization, the philosopher Michel Foucault. New to your vocabulary will be hermaphrodite, intersex, and although you might be familiar with the idea of normalcy, we're going to unpack it just a little bit more through this lecture. We have plenty of questions to consider throughout this lecture and while reading Intersex, for lack of a better word, by Thea Hellman. I will refrain from reading them throughout. However, you may take a look and jot them down or just have them in the back of your mind as you're going through the literature and the presentation. So when we look at Thea Hellman's stories, her narrative, we see that she is working towards bringing the public awareness to intersex people and actually how common they are, and it being a kind of normal part of the gender spectrum. One of the statistics that she mentions is that 1 out of 2,000 infants are born with intersex condition. That is as common as people born with red hair. Naturally red hair rather than dyed, of course. And if you look around and try to scan how many naturally born redheads are out there, you can get an idea of how many intersex people are out there. Now, in some places, intersex, just as in some places, redheads are a more common trait than in other places. This statistic is specific to the West and the United States. However, if we go to Australia, there is a link down here on the bottom left-hand side of the slide where you can go to the Intersex Allies organization, which advocates for intersex recognition and issues dealing with genital mutilation or infant genital mutilation. We will see the same statistic mentioned. And I really liked the little photo that they had on their website because it shows or it states 1.5% of, and again, this is in Australia, 1.5% of the Australian populace is born with an intersex condition. And then some more statistics for you taken from this site is sex assignment versus gender identities. So sex assignment reported at birth, we see on the chart 52% are determined to be female at birth, whereas 41% are determined, and this is strictly via genitalia, right? Looking at an infant's sex organs, external sex organs, we see that 41% are considered male. However, there is some ambiguity within a certain percentage, and it's a fairly small percent, so like 10% of the populace is neither completely identified as female or male. And then when we, or when they have looked at those same people that have grown up, so those infants grown up as adults, they represent a shift where 52% are female and 23% are actually male. So the number almost gets cut in half. And then those smaller, less common categories, if you will, actually grow. So the other option grows 3 times, so to 12, from 4% to 12%. Unsure are raises from 4% to 6%, and then X is 7%, jumping from 2%. And so this gender identity and sex identity, if you will, biological sex identity, is really complicated by people that are born with intersex conditions, because we can see that it's not so clear cut. It's not just about being male or female, and you cannot necessarily just look at a baby's external genitalia and say, oh yeah, they're going to grow up to be like this, because as we will find out, the world is much more complicated than what is portrayed. From dehumanization to humanization. So again, looking back at Australia in 2013, there was an article published that discussed the involuntary or coerced sterilization of intersex people. And it found out it was very common within the medical practice to look at an infant's genitalia and make a determination. The doctors would make a determination based on a chart similar to the one down at the bottom right-hand corner, where if a person had normal genitalia, as seen in number 1, or normal, which is just 0, right? The starting point, they would be considered female. However, as you move along towards the right of the spectrum, let's say number 3, if the clitoris is larger, then perhaps they could be determined by the doctors without looking at any internal organs or looking at any hormone levels, which we will discuss, changes as we age and depending on diet, environment, all sorts of stressors. That person can either, that infant can either be assigned female at birth and they will get genital reassignment and surgery, or they can be male and their genitals will be surgically enhanced or manipulated to look more like a male. And then as we see all the way to the right-hand spectrum, we have the male, kind of what is considered normal or ideal. And so the allies and intersex people, they discuss how this is dehumanizing to an infant because it takes away all agency for their future to determine what they want to be. So physical sex characteristics such as anatomy, chromosomes are not necessarily always taken into consideration, and they bring up that intersex status is not necessarily about gender identity or sex orientation, because it's it's just something that they are born with. They are human beings that fall in this kind of ambiguous category, which is completely acceptable within our mammalian and biological spectrum of the natural world. And they also bring up that intersex people face many of the same issues as LGBT people, and also as they also face same issues or similar issues regarding people with disabilities. Are these people, or will these people grow up to be capable of determining who they can be, or is it a larger is it the responsibility of a more knowledgeable, quote unquote, populace that can determine who these people should be, right? So if we look at the medical communities or psychological communities or psychiatric communities or parental units, these all have a role to play within determining who has the right to determine what they want to be. And then you get into this idea of society and what are the ideals, and are those ideals of being normal, should they even be promoted? The advocates for intersex rights also, state that medical intervention should not assume that there is a crisis in a person being born with intersex. So there's not a crisis in being different, and normalization should not be the goal. So if we look at the images on the top right hand part of the slide, we will see that mentioned the historical placards that are in Indianapolis, acknowledging the fact, like the kind of sad and twisted history of the United States and Indiana specifically with regard to eugenics. So we have discussed previously the eugenics laws, and by the late 1800s, how eugenics had kind of spread all over the world. And basically it was a move to create a model society through its citizenry. In 1907, the governor J. Frank Hanley of Indiana approved this first state eugenics law, making sterilization mandatory for certain individuals in state custody. Those individuals were people with criminal backgrounds, mental problems, and pauperism. So anything that fell outside of the norm. And as we have discussed in previous lectures, this also, these policies, eugenics policies, were also used against people with minority status. So Native Americans or First Nations peoples, Puerto Ricans, and other Hispanic groups, as well as people who had physical disabilities. So this, again, took away a person's consent. Often it was done without knowledge of the people that were undergoing the sterilization, and it mostly occurred for women, and it was supposed to be a means to better society. Of course, we know eugenics was also a part of Nazi policy, and where Jews, Gypsies, and other groups, mixed race groups, were sterilized against their will. So acknowledging these dirty kind of secrets of United States and the world history, global history, because this happened all over the Western world. It's not to throw dirt necessarily on those nations. It doesn't lessen the greatness of the societies, but it does help us to unpack the injustices and the inhumanity and the dehumanization that have been done to human beings, and it allows us to heal those wounds. So in Indiana specifically, it took until 1974 until the Governor Otis R. Bowen actually approved the repeal of all sterilization laws. And by 1977, related restrictive marriage laws were finally repealed. So these eugenics laws only fairly recently were dismantled, and it has a long history. And so how do we as a society begin to unpack and allow these histories and people to be healed, and how do we do reparations? And then an example from India within the past few years, 20, around 2016, 1 in 3 Indian women had been sterilized. 1/3 had not given their informed consent. And again, with these eugenics ideas involved, it was for considering the betterment of society, because if a woman has less children, they can provide better for those children, better for themselves, because as we are aware, a woman's biology has determined for much of human history whether they will become, you know, that they will become women rather than whether they will become women because of their biological facility.
Virilizing hypoplasia is the condition which Thea Hillman herself lives with. And it is an inherited disorder which affects the adrenal glands. People with this condition, they produce excess male sex hormones. And there's 3 types of virilizing hyperplasia. Male and female in the 2 classic forms, which is also considered the salt wasting disease, is most severe. And then there's simple virilizing types. So males and females with this condition have early growth spurts, but usually their final adult height is shorter than their genetic family members. Females typically have ambiguous external genitalia, but males have normal genitalia because it is a issue with excess male androgens. However, their testes might be small. And then approximately 75% of people with this classic virilizing hyperplasia have salt wasting type.
Here we are again, Michel Foucault. I really enjoy Michel Foucault because he unpacks our Western ideas of human sexuality and normalcy. And this directly relates to people with intersex conditions. So in chapter 2 of Hillman's book, she discusses how she used humor as part of her dealing with who she was and what she was going through. So the example that she gives is her hanging out with a bunch of her friends as a little girl and telling a joke that invokes humor. Of course, it invokes humor, but it invokes gender, anatomy, and children and sexuality. So kind of a mature joke that she tells. And she talks about how it was maybe a little bit uncomfortable for some. And this idea of children being sexual objects is usually not something that we think about here in the West. So I bring up Michel Foucault because in his History of Sexuality, Volume 1, he addresses how in 17th century Europe, sex was everywhere regardless of who was around. So children could be around, elderly people, it didn't matter. And on page 3 of the English translation, quote, anatomies were shown and intermingled at will. And so if we have children around and seeing sexual activities take place, more often than not, children mimic their elders. And so children were engaging in sexual exploration, just like their adult peers. So this all changed according to Foucault's research during Victorian bourgeoisie time. And if you will remember, this time people became obsessed with blood and hereditary, not only illnesses, but the bloodline, and getting a good bloodline meant that your family was going to be healthy, but they were also going to be wealthy, right? So this idea of sex moved from the public sphere into the home. It moved into the realm of pleasure, to a realm of reproduction. Remember, this Victorian age also coincided with industrial revolution and production, capitalism. And so the idea of normal sex between a normal male and a normal female was the only thing that was allowed in order to produce a human being that would contribute to society. Because again, sex became an object of reproduction. In order to have a capitalist society, Michel Foucault argued, you need to harness the power of sex, the life-giving power of sex, right? And I'm not saying that Europe was the epitome of this, because these ideas of what was acceptable sex have reigned throughout various cultures, but it became codified within Victorian society, England, and that moved out to Europe and other places and other colonized places. So what this did to the society and to citizens is that behavior and speech became sanitized. What was acceptable public speech versus what was considered deviant became a thing. It became codified, and there were legal repercussions. So repression of sex and pleasure became a thing that could be punishable by law. On page 4 of Michel Foucault's History of Sexuality, Volume 1, he states, if it was forced to make room for illegitimate sexualities, it was reasoned, let them take their internal mischief elsewhere, to a place where they could be reintegrated, if not in the circuits of production, at least in those for profit. So, in other words, People that were seeking pleasure in sex, um, they would be relegated to brothels, prostitution. So women who like freely gave their sex up, they would be relegated to prostitution and brothels because that was a way of producing money, right, for sex. Those people with conditions such as homosexuality or intersex conditions, they would be tolerated only in places of um, trying to make them normal. So psychiatry was a rising profession at that time. And institutions, psychiatric institutions, gave rise to this idea of looking at the human body and trying to push this idea of normalcy for all people. And, basically it was job creation.
Those of you who are in the medical field will be interested in Thea Hillman's story because it deals with pathologizing the other. So anytime there is an anomaly within the human body, um, medical technicians um, have to discuss and look at what might be the cause of this anomaly. And so they treat these people, rather than being people, they treat and discuss what might have gone wrong. Why is this person not like all the others? So when we look at Thea Hillman, who discusses the own medicalization of her body, she discusses how she enjoyed her difference because the difference gave her special attention from all these adults who happen to be medical professionals. But she got all this attention and they treated her very nicely. Unfortunately, this is not always the case with intersex children. And looking at the old medical archives, um, intersex people, intersex children were defaced and depersonalized as pseudo-hermaphrodites. They were photographed, they were poked and prodded to find out why they were not normal, if you will. What went wrong? And so this treatment of intersex people, unlike Thea Hillman, who had a loving mother, um, became the children became um, dehumanized, and rather than being little people with feelings, they became objects of medical scrutiny and curiosity. And this continues to this day. One of the reasons that Thea Hillman wanted to write this book and engage in this activism. And Hillman points out, how at age 4, she began growing pubic hair, and her mother's response to this was like, what did I do wrong? And again, we come to this issue of, you know, the responsibility of a biological woman and um, carrying the child and her being blamed for everything that went wrong, right? Nobody necessarily looked at the father, and the father didn't necessarily take responsibility.
Intersex people and representation in society. In our pursuit of normalcy, and when I say our, I mean Western civilization since Victorian age, the representation of human diversity has been co-opted into, like Foucault said, specific arenas. So with regard to bearded ladies who had, a variant of virilizing hyperplasia, you had circuses, right? That was an acceptable place to have people, women that had beards in society. It removed them from the quote unquote normal males and females, and gave them a place where they could be producing, right? They produced a spectacle, they produced money, and again, it was institutionalized within circuses. And on the right-hand side, there is a image of a bearded lady, which was quite common in circuses of the late 1800s and 1900s. Today, circuses are very, very different. No more freak shows, as you will, as they were called. And now it's just animals, which is also controversial, but there are animal trainers and animals doing tricks, and people doing these amazing feats of strength and flexibility and just courage. However, as a society, we are tending to move more towards being acceptable, for other ways of being to be acceptable. So an example is MTV's intersex character played by an intersex person, a reality TV show, right? And so that is an attempt of media to be a little bit more sensitive to the human variations. And it's also an attempt of MTV to, kind of educate people, because a lot of people get educated by media. And then there's an example in the YouTube video about a bearded lady who lives in England, who is of South Asian descent, and she talks about the kind of transformation of her identity and how she accepted her genetic variant, right? And how her being able to accept herself allowed the society to accept her a little bit more and create, maybe a better and more welcoming society.
So I really like this part of Intersex, which talks about representation. Um, Thea Hellman brings up Jeffrey Eugenides' 2002 book, Middlesex, which I have read when it first came out on recommendation of a friend of mine. So Hillman brings up that Eugenides is cisgendered. Um, the novel is a Pulitzer Prize winner, and it was
So as stated in the previous slide, hermaphrodite was a term that was reserved for intersex people for a long time. And the definition of hermaphrodites was a person or animal having both male and female sex organs or other sexual characteristics, either abnormally or, in the case of some organisms, as a natural condition. And what this definition fails to mention is that the sex organs of both male and female were working in working conditions. Oftentimes, intersex people, depending on the level of their this condition, they may not have one or the other or both sex organs working. So in some cases, there is infertility, like complete infertility. And therefore, this idea of a hermaphrodite, which comes from the mythological son of Aphrodite and Hermes, and their union, or his union with a nymph, having the ability to reproduce with itself is not necessarily a part of a human condition. So this idea of hermaphrodite and calling intersex people hermaphrodites is actually considered derogatory. Now, some examples of intersex and or hermaphrodites, we have the ancient Greek sculpture of Hermaphroditus, who represents both the male and female characteristics. And interestingly enough, we have clownfish, and there's other examples within the animal kingdom, or the fish kingdom, if you will, of sequential hermaphrodites. So a little clownfish, for instance, is born a male, but they can turn into females at some point in their lives. And this happens as a result of environmental factors. If there are too few females in certain species of fishes, then the males will turn into females in order for, to reproduce their offspring and keep the population of the species alive. And then at the bottom right corner, we have Caster Semenya, who is a South African athlete. She was a track star. She had, I believe, 3 times the amount of androgen hormones within her system as her other normal female competitors. And so many people who were, like on the competitive, like opposites of her, saw her musculature, because she's very muscular, and, saw her enhanced abilities and stamina as being, they considered her to be a man, and were trying to disqualify her and strip her of her many medals that she won, because they felt it was unfair for her to be placed in the same competitive arena with naturally normal born females who have normal levels of androgens and female to male hormone ratio. They did tests on her. Again, this leads to, or this goes back to this issue of dehumanizing and pathologizing a human being, right? A person. She identified as a female. Her whole family identified her as a female. And she was relegated to various hormonal tests. People wanted to see her genitals to make sure that she wasn't a man competing as a woman. And actually, if we look at the Middlesex book by Eugenides, we see that he brings up three places where this intersex condition happens quite often. Greece is one, and he kind of writes about this. He kind of frames his story around this intersex or hermaphrodite, how he calls her, person because of his Greek heritage. So Greece is one place. Another place is the Dominican Republic. And I believe they're called, sorry, I got to count in Spanish. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro, diez, 11, 12. I think it's 12 huevos, because they're called 12 huevos because at the age 12, these intersex people, that's when typically their testicles drop and they are seen as males. So their gender or their sex actually changes because of this intersex condition. And then the third place is South Africa, and Castor Semenya just happens to be from South Africa and a world-class athlete. So these ideas of intersex and how they play out within society are very interesting, and how we treat them is intersex individuals is determined by how we treat things that fall outside of our ideas of normalcy and ideal.
Green pornos are these wonderful little YouTube videos by Isabella Rossellini, a famous Italian actress. And what she does, they're very, very creative, but what they do is they explore the gender and sexuality of a variety of animals within and insects within the natural world. And watching these might give you some interesting and a varied view of what we consider normal. I have here the dolphin video link, as well as the shrimp video link, which I had mentioned earlier. Hormones and the human body. The human body is amazing, and it can be altered through physical and chemical means. So I have two bodybuilders pictured here. The one on the left-hand side is actually, she's been my role model, if you will, forever. Linda Murray, she was Miss Olympia a few times. Her physique is amazing, and her musculature, you can see everything, and there is no way that she is a natural bodybuilder. She actually is a steroid user, and the man on the right-hand side, and I actually don't remember who he is, but he is a man, and he is obviously a steroid user because his musculature, again, like Linda Murray, is so pronounced. He has so little fat on him. But you will notice, if you will, around his nipples, he has a condition that is called gynecomastia. And that means it is fat that gathers and is deposited around the nipples. And for male steroid users, it can actually induce lactation. Male athletes, male bodybuilders, they often get surgery to eliminate liposuction, to eliminate this unsightly fat around their finely chiseled bodies. Now, the anatomy of a steroid user, there's various things that can happen within the male and female bodies. I know this is a small diagram. However, for females, you can have like pattern baldness because of the steroid use. Both male and females, their hearts can enlarge. For women, their clitoris can grow large, and there's actually a fetish for some people that look at very muscle-bound women and their enlarged clitorises. Um, Whereas men, their organs can actually shrink. Um, and then both for men and women, steroid users, their fat content in their body is going to lessen. I pointed out how men actually gain or retain fat around their nipples. For women, it's actually the opposite because female breasts are mostly made up of glands and fat. Their fat can, or the fat in their breasts will lower, and so many female bodybuilders that take steroids or that don't take steroids, they get breast implants, they get breast augmentation, and then with a very low fat percentage, women will stop menstruating. And this goes for all athletes. They can be track stars, they can be soccer stars, tennis, what else? Soccer, tennis, gymnasts. If they have a low body fat, they will not menstruate, and they can actually lose bone mass. And so it actually becomes very dangerous later in life.
Hormones at work. So the human body is something that changes over time. And with that, our physical body changes, but also our chemistry changes. And chemistry, which is dictated partly by our hormones. And our hormones vary depending on our life cycle, where we fall in the life cycle at what time. Depending on situations, interactions, activities, diet, and genetics, hormone levels can vary. And they can also be manipulated. As we saw in the previous slide, we have bodies and hormones can be manipulated through steroids, and we see the repercussions. With anabolic steroids, you can have increased muscle mass, decreased levels of fat in most areas, genital formation can be changed. And then we have internal organs that can be affected, such as the heart being enlarged, and other like male pattern baldness can occur. But these same things can be manipulated with regard to male and female hormone replacement therapy. So it's interesting that people who might not necessarily be pro transgender people can accept an older menopausal woman taking hormone replacement therapy to like lessen hot flashes or lessen the intensity of menopause. However, giving estrogen to a male who wants to be a female is considered taboo. So you have this kind of double standard. And then vice versa, we have an aging man who takes testosterone therapy. That is perfectly acceptable. However, a female to male transgender person, it's considered in maybe those same people to be something that is, totally against what nature is supposed to be doing. So our conceptions of gender are very value laden with regard to what we consider normal. I urge you to watch the YouTube video that I've posted here, because it shows an F to M, so female to male transgender person that goes on a testosterone journey over the 5 years. What's super interesting is that, and I just think is impressive, because he had the discipline to actually do a recording, like on a regular basis, to show us and educate people that are non-transgender, and people that might want to undergo this transition. And so we see the comparison between the person's female self, and just by not only just, but by the manipulation of hormones, the comparison between their male self, and how this, not only do they look completely like that they were born as they were male, but we also come up with these issues of science and what our science technology allows us to do. Like in the 14th century, if a person might have been transgender or intersex, there were places in society that it was acceptable, and people were given, special statuses because of their what they were born with, and because they didn't have the technology that we have now. This idea of transgender is fairly a newer construction of how we see gender. And then, so I have some charts for you guys to look at that are kind of interesting with regard to how environment can actually affect the levels of hormones. So we see in the very top middle section, men exposed to ovulating women maintain a consistently higher testosterone level than men exposed to non-ovulating women, which is super interesting because that can have an effect on their sex drive, or their the idea of masculinity and the performance, if you will, of masculinity. Another interesting fact, I mean, they're all kind of interesting, but let's say like the film, after watching a sexually explicit movie, men have a 35% increase in testosterone levels, again, which can affect sexuality, right? Looking at women, down at the bottom right corner of this center infographic, you have falling in love increases a woman's testosterone level. So like, what would that do to maybe sex drive? Well, testosterone levels actually increase a person's sex drive. And again, because men and women have testosterone and estrogen, we have, they're varying at levels, but we are all, as Dr. Joe Stallman said in his discussion, we are all two-spirit, right? And science has proven this. And then looking at the main facts about estrogen infographic, we see that estrogen is the major sex hormone found in women, but men also have estrogen. It's just not as high. However, as men age, their testosterone levels drop and their estrogen levels fall. That is why some men opt for testosterone hormone replacement to keep their levels of muscle mass and keep that virility. Otherwise, they go for Viagra. And then another thing is secondary sex characteristics such as breasts, smooth skin, less facial hair, whiter pelvic bones, etc. are all a result of estrogen. So as estrogen falls in women, their physical characteristics actually change. And so a lot of women opt for estrogen hormone replacement in order to keep that ideal female or feminine external qualities. And then lastly, the ovaries are responsible for most of the estrogen production. Other organs contribute a small amount of estrogen to the body, and these organs include the liver, breasts, and adrenal glands. So yeah, just take these things into consideration. And I mean, we're always changing. And even though we think that, we get very attached to the way things are, even in our bodies, things change. And the more flexible we are within our ideas and ideals, the more flexible and our society can be, and the better we are able to deal with people that don't necessarily fall into what we consider the norm.
So pronouns 101. Ask me about my pronouns. There's a variety of pronouns that go beyond, he, she, him, her, they, them, their. And so we discussed some of this when Dr. Eastman was here, giving you guys an introduction to safe zone training. But when in doubt, you can always just ask someone and be open to how a person presents themselves. Again, if we want a more civil society, we want to be treating people the way they want to be treated rather than how we want ourselves to be treated, because not everybody, has the same desires and is brought up in the same way. So communication is key.
So this is a great gender identity and expression infographic that is interactive that you can play with. I have attached the link so you can click or scroll anywhere and zoom to see the definitions that fall into masculinity, femininity, and then the things that are either neither or both. And we see that this idea of gender identity and expression are way more complicated than what our ideals of men and female portray within the media.
So we have the genderbread person, which looks at the fact that gender is between the ears, and we can see it with the little identity kind of bubble that points toward the brain. Sex, as a friend of mine said, is between the legs and often is represented by the genitals. And then you have the heart, which is your sexual orientation, what you're turned on by, what you like. And then your expression is your whole outer body, right? How you perform. So going back to Judith Butler. And we have maybe ideals of what a man is, what a woman is, what masculine is, what feminine is, male, female, heterosexual, homosexual, but though there is all the things in between. And so we come up with this spectrum. So rather than being like things are black and white, things are male and female, one way or the other, we have this whole variety of these different gender identities, expression, biological sex, and sexual orientation. Now, looking at the Kinsey scale with regard to sexuality, the Kinsey Institute located in at Indiana University, Kinsey, who did sexual or sexuality studies with what he called straight men, looked at and interviewed the variety of sexual encounters that men had. And so he found that there was a spectrum. So even though most of the people that he um, interviewed and who partook in his study classified themselves as straight cisgender men, um, he found that there were some people that um, considered themselves as exclusively heterosexual. However, there were other groups of people that found that they were or considered themselves mostly heterosexual, but had encountered heterosexual practices in their lives. And then there were others that kind of said that they were equally heterosexual and homosexual, and they had equal encounters. And then there were, as he moved on to um, the sexuality scale, he found that there were some that were mostly homosexual, like that's where most of their sexual encounters happened. And then there were those that were exclusively homosexual within their encounters. And then there were others outside of that spectrum who had no sexual contact or reactions. And all are fine and acceptable. None were bad people or good people per se. It is just something that occurs within human biology and human sexuality. Coming back to Foucault, um, in History of Sexualities, page 25, volume 1, quote, one of the great innovation in the techniques of power in the 18th century was the emergence of population as an economic and political problem. Population of wealth, population as manpower or labor capacity, population balance between its own growth and the resources it commanded. At the heart of this economic and political problem of population was sex. And then he continues later on in the book, throughout the 19th century, which is when bourgeois idea of sex coming into the home and strictly being for reproduction rather than pleasure came about. Sex seems to have been incorporated into two very distinct orders of knowledge: a biology of reproduction, which developed continuously according to general scientific normativity, and the medicine of sex. So anything that dealt with people knowing about sex, knowing about pleasure, masturbation, queer sex, sex parties, that was considered deviant. All of which Hillman brings up. So we've come to the end slide. Thank you all for watching and participating in reading the book and watching the lecture. I leave you with this question of normalcy. What is it? Is it natural? Is it socially constructed? As we've seen within the book and through this lecture, this idea of having a male and a female, these ideals of masculinity, femininity, men and women are ideals that have been put forth through our culture, through top down as well as bottom up. Ideas of what is acceptable. Those things have changed throughout time, just like what has been acceptable with regard to how we perform sex, where we perform sex has changed. It has changed depending on the place that we have lived, the places that human beings live in, as well as the times that we live in. And people that are intersex, they really help us to
challenge these ideas of what is considered normal with regard to gender and sexuality. And Thea Hillman, I think, does a really good job of giving us a peek into the intimacy of the intersex community and the intersex world and the variety of human gender diversity. So thank you again. I hope you enjoyed this, and just continue to explore and keep your mind open.